Super. Yeah, I think it'd be really nice to begin with something that, doesn't define Laylo, but is certainly quite an amazing achievement this early on in the company, which is this huge fundraising round you've
Yeah.
just closed as a seed. So perhaps you could give us a little bit of an insight into how you made the decision to seek investment in the first place, and then the journey through what that process was like, and the sigh of relief I imagine you breathed after you managed to close it.
Yeah. So, firstly, it's not the first time we've raised money. I think starting a business, particularly starting a kind of disruptive business, maybe fairly capital intensive business, because we're actually making a product. You have a choice, right? You either bootstrap or you seek investment. And for us, bootstrapping wasn't really feasible because wine is quite a capital intensive product. So unless you have a duty suspended kind of place to put it, then the first thing you need to do is pay HMRC loads of money when wine arrives in the country. You've got to buy cardboard, you've got to buy packaging, get a filling partner. So there's so much cost up front. So we originally raised money back in 2021 to get us off the ground. And this was, I guess, what people would call a friends and family round, although it was only a couple of friends and none of my family, but people I kind of knew, people I've worked with before, and that got us going. We raised again in 2022, so we were on this kind of treadmill, and this was great. So this was an angel round, and again, this was money that we could invest in growing, and at this point we were just D2C, so selling direct on our website. The most recent fundraise was completely different. So here we were raising a more substantial amount of money. So we were gunning for $1 million. We ended up raising 1.1. We were looking for institutional investment as well as angels, which brings with it a whole lot, more complexity, because it's a more sort of rigorous DD process. I guess you've got many more stakeholders because you have the investor, but you also have their committees and their LPs. And I think, actually the fundraising environment is very different now to when we started. It's pretty hard. People tell me it's the hardest fundraising environment in 20 years. So embarking on raising this round was quite scary. So I knew we had a great story. I knew we had, really clear vision for what we would do with the money. But we are, we're consumer, we're female founded, we're alcohol, lots of things that make it really hard to raise. So you asked about the process. I mean, for us, I don't think as a startup founder you ever stop fundraising. There's times when you're kind of switched on and you might be sharing decks or sharing models and actually actively seeking investment. But I think fundraising is more than that. It's building relationships, it's networking. So, I spent a big chunk of last year meeting people, whether that's other founders who had already raised, angels who were interested in backing us, funds who perhaps were the right size and scale for us. So by the time we actually started to officially fundraise, I kind of had a hit list of people that I would reach out to. And, if I hopefully did my job well, I mean, we closed the round, so did something right, but tried to make sure that when those conversations started, it wasn't the first time people had heard about us, that they were kind of warmed up to our business and me and what we wanted to achieve. But it was a hard period. I think fundraising is always difficult, but certainly at the moment it's just that little bit trickier.
You've got some pretty weighty credentials personally. Out of interest, when you were having those initial conversations, perhaps even before the largest round you've just closed, did your personal credentials play a big role in securing that investment?
Yeah, I think so. I think when people are investing in an early stage business like ours, even if we've got some great traction, but ultimately you're investing in an idea and a market, and you're investing in the people who are going to execute. And I think that a huge part of why we've been successful in getting investment is that I have past experience in this industry that, it's not my first rodeo. I haven't founded a business before, but I have, effectively run the commercial side of a really big medium-sized business. I hesitate to say startup now that I work in a true startup with 5 people. But I think that's really important, and I think it gives people reassurance that their money, their investment is in safe hands. That said, sometimes I think, I'm in my mid, possibly late 30s. I also bring not just kind of professional experience, but I'm not fresh out of university with nothing to lose. Like I have a family. I've invested some really crucial years of my career, and at a point when it was really accelerating into this company. And I think that brings with it a sense of responsibility that actually investors really like.
Yeah.
You've spoken about how the market is difficult right now, hardest in 20 years to receive investment. What is it about Laylo, do you think, makes it something that is an investable company?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is that what we're saying we can achieve has, to an extent, already happened elsewhere. So boxed wine in the UK is kind of this much maligned format. And, you ask someone in the street, if you tried boxed wine, oh, it's cheap plonk. That's, 99% of people will say that. And actually, boxed wine represents a really small part of the market here. So I think currently it's sitting around 4% of wine sales are in a box. Now, internationally, that's just not the case. It doesn't have that stigma. So in France, 44% of wine sold in the supermarket is sold in a box. In the Nordics, it's over 60% of the market. So I think that when we're talking about, what we want to achieve through Laylo, which is to make boxed wine a default and accepted way to drink at home and out when you're in bars and restaurants, it's not a huge leap to think that can be realized, because you just go to France, hop on a ferry, and you can see that happening elsewhere.
So forgive the ignorance, but why is it preferential to have wine out of a box as opposed to a bottle?
Yeah, so there's 2 main reasons. The first is kind of lifestyle and related. So boxed wine stays completely airtight, so it stays fresher for longer. So if you're anything like me, you might open a bottle of wine on a Monday or Tuesday, put it in your fridge door, kind of forget about it for a few days, and the next time you pour it, it's just not going to taste as like fresh and delicious.
Yeah.
Even if it's not fully oxidized, it's just not quite the same.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a box of wine, it collapses on itself, so it stays completely airtight, and therefore you keep it fresher for longer. So fresh up to 6 weeks for a box of our wine. And then the other is about sustainability. So each box generates 90% less carbon than glass bottles, because it's so much lighter. If you imagine what 3 glass bottles weighs, it's almost as much, sometimes more, than the weight of the wine inside. So it just makes it a much more kind of sustainable and eco-conscious way of drinking. And both of these things are trends, right? So people are making more sustainably conscious decisions, and they're drinking less, but they're drinking better. So it really sits at the intersection of these 2 kind of big trends in wine.
Yeah, I mean, part of my research into coming into this was, obviously you hear it getting thrown around a lot, how people are drinking less, and that is, I assume, for an alcohol business, potentially a big worry.
Yeah, like, of course. I mean, working in wine, you think about this all the time, but actually it's not true to say that everyone is just, simply drinking less and therefore the market is declining. Actually, what's happening is people are drinking less in terms of volume, but they're upgrading themselves. Actually, if you go out to a restaurant and bar these days, you're much more likely to see people drinking a really nice glass of wine, but they probably spend just that little bit more on that glass because it's the only one they're going to have, and they want it to be a lovely experience. So in terms of like the value of the market is persisting, and that's really exciting. So we quite intentionally have positioned Laylo to be a premium product. So it's a sort of wine that you would spend maybe £15 per bottle in a nice wine merchant. And therefore, that one glass that you pour straight from your fridge, perhaps on a Monday evening, because you don't have to commit to a bottle, is really delicious and is something special and a small treat. But yeah, I mean, it's what everyone thinks about in alcohol.
Yeah.
How do you buck that trend?
Yeah. So how do you go about ensuring that you have premium quality wine?
Yeah, good question. So firstly, we know, and I personally know from kind of prior experience in previous roles, that people are quite sticky to their wine drinking. Actually, we all walk into a supermarket aisle and are completely overwhelmed by the number of bottles that we see. And most people will have a kind of go-to set of wines, and that's probably, if you're a white drinker, some sort of Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio, or Chardonnay. If you're a red drinker, it's probably a Malbec, a Merlot, or a Syrah, or something like that. So we do try and stick to styles that we know are crowd-pleasing. We only have 6 wines at the moment, so there's no point in making any of them too niche. And at that point, we work with a master of wine, a lady called Clem Yates. Now, this qualification, if you haven't heard of it, is insanely hard to get. I think she's one of only like 400 odd people who have it in the entire world. And honestly, fewer people have this qualification than have been to space. Like, it's really hard to get. And she helps us, once we've got that shopping list, to identify small scale, really lovely independent producers that can make wine of a quality that we can be really proud of. And to put it in context, for every wine that we have in the Laylo range, we might have tried like 40 or 50, which sounds very glamorous, but it's actually quite a rigorous process to kind of run down and think really carefully about, if I didn't know anything about this wine, what would I think? If I didn't know the price per litre, what would I think? Try and be completely agnostic to everything that a customer wouldn't know, and to just imagine being at home pouring that glass of wine. So it's quite rigorous. I mean, we do also benchmark taste. So once we've found the wine and we've kind of figured out with the winemakers a price, and we're bringing it over to the country, we'll then just triple check that our pricing sits with our promise. So we will go out to a Majestic or a supermarket or an independent producer, find similar styles, put them in a lineup, blind taste them, and just check that we're sitting in that right space.
And does the packaging, you've spoken about the benefits of it from a lifestyle perspective and also from an environmental perspective. What about economically? So is it cheaper to put wine on the shelf in a box than it is in a bottle?
So it is marginally cheaper. I think that for us, we're a small business, whereas most of the wines on the shelf that you see will have been produced by a fairly small handful of kind of mega companies, and therefore the sort of volume efficiencies that they get on glass bottles kind of offset most of that benefit. But I would say that, actually with boxed wine, you have the benefit of not like wasting any wine, so that just makes it a much better value bottle or vessel, I suppose. But for the trade, so bars and restaurants, there is a kind of really clear commercial benefit, and that is that it's becoming more expensive to recycle glass. So it might be somewhere between 25 and 30 pence a bottle that, a regular restaurant or bar is paying to recycle that glass. And that's completely eliminated with boxed wine. So it's not so simple as to say a box is cheaper than a glass bottle, because there are so many different kind of parallel things happening. But ultimately, like, the combination of all of those different factors means that you as a consumer, or you as a kind of buyer or decision maker at a restaurant or bar, is getting a better quality wine for the price that you're paying.
So you mentioned a few of bigger players, let's say, that are dominating the wine shelves. Have any of them sort of begun to transition into boxed wine or thinking about it?
Yeah, so if you, like, anyone listening to this, and you guys, you pop out to a like grocer or a supermarket, and you'll notice the boxed wine aisle probably if you haven't looked at it before. And you will notice that is getting more substantial. So, I've been working on Laylo for about 3.5 years now, and it's become a much bigger part of any kind of retail offering. But any new entrants into the market tend to be like at that entry level price where the big wine players know that there is existing volume. So I think we're trying to do something slightly different, which is to create a premium price point such that we can do for boxed wine what the likes of Whispering Angel did for rosé, which is to say we're not about just producing a nice quality wine but at a low price point. We're about creating a premium product with a premium experience that people feel genuinely proud to buy. And that might be a slightly smaller addressable market, but we're okay with that because ultimately we want to be the brand that's synonymous with quality, and there's not really anyone else doing that at the moment in the market.
When you begin these conversations with the retailers who are presumably going to sell your wine in the future, and also the consumers directly, you've obviously got to communicate your brand message and what you're trying to achieve. Have you found that it's well, I should say, which market have you prioritized in communicating that vision that you have for Laylo too? Is it first the retailers, or is it first the consumers and then the retailers come afterwards?
So we chose to sell direct to consumer first on our website. Now, part of that was just by virtue of the fact that my background is in D2C, so it made sense. It was what I know. But I think it's actually been quite a good move for us, because the beauty of D2C is that you have a direct conversation with the end consumer. And some of that is a literal conversation, asking for feedback. And we ring lots of customers just on the phone, ask them what they think. And that's super useful to us. But then also using digital marketing to figure out what the hierarchy is of things that people care about. And there's things people tell you that they care about, and then there's the actions that they take. And a combination of those two things, I think you can paint quite a good picture when you're focused on D2C, rather than having a kind of intermediary, whether that's a retailer or a restaurant and bar, between you and the people actually ultimately consuming it. So that's been like really important for learning. More recently, we've started to move into other channels. So from a retail side, we're in Whole Foods. We've just launched on Ocado. So we're, at the more sort of premium end. And then for on-trade, by which I mean bars, restaurants, we have some lovely kind of chains of gastropubs and casual dining chains who are serving our wine. And we get brilliant feedback from those intermediaries, and we get sales data, and we get a sense of what wine styles are selling and what we can do to help drive run rate. But it's just not the same as having, being at the coalface and talking to those customers directly.
Is shipping, I mean, I know it might be so tedious, but of course you're shipping a product which is, I take it, although you've saved some weight on the box, overall quite a heavy item in the end, because it's 3 bottles, right, combined.
Yeah.
Are the logistics of storing and shipping something that's been a learning curve for you, or were you already dealing with boxed wines in your D2C career?
Yeah, so I'd never, in fact, slight digression from your question, but when I was at Naked Wines, I remember Ray O'Connor, who was our wine director at the time. He's also a master of wine. I'm lucky to have quite a couple of these in my life. So Ray came up to me at my desk. I was the marketing director at the time, and he said, "I've had this idea, Laura. I think we should put a boxed wine in our Christmas case." And I remember turning to him going, "Absolutely not, no way." And within 2 years I'd started a boxed wine business. So no, I had not any experience on shipping boxed wine. I guess wine in a bottle is also very heavy, quite prone to breakage. So had some experience there, and I think more importantly had some really good contacts. So we worked with a brilliant warehouse who, we work with Naked Wines. If you know the best people, there's no point in not taking advantage of that. The biggest learning was definitely around the unique challenges of basically a cardboard box with liquid sloshing around inside has quite a lot of I don't know how you describe it, sort of weak points that you wouldn't necessarily be able to guess. So the first incarnation of our kind of outer shipping boxes, we thought, oh, it's just going to be tight to the box and that'll be fine. But actually we found out the hard way that if you're throwing that around through distribution, even if you've got the best guys in the biz doing it, it will get damaged. So we did a really interesting project it must be about 18 months ago now, working with a brilliant packaging company called DS Smith. And basically what we did was try and figure out, using proper physics, how it was above my head, but what the different options were. And so now our outer boxes have quite a unique, our shipping boxes have quite a unique design where the boxes are kind of slanted and there's space around it. And I mean, damages have gone down to virtually zero now. So
Nice.
It was definitely worth investing the time. I just was completely naive to that when we started. But then I guess that's part of the joy of a startup, right?
Yeah.
Something goes wrong, you figure out how to fix it, and then you move on to the next fire that needs fighting.
And with regards to, you've secured the funding round, and so now there's an opportunity for you, presumably, to grow both your team and your kind of market share. I'm curious to know, from a supply chain perspective, what kind of balance do you have to strike with if you grow? If you, for example, got a large order from a retail chain, let's say, how constrained are you on the back end to actually source the fantastic wine you're putting in the box?
Yeah, so this is something that lots of our most savvy investors asked about, but luckily we'd kind of laid the groundwork last year. So the requirements of a wine at scale, so let's say, that's being sold into a major supermarket or casual dining chain, are obviously quite different to small scale. When it's gone. So it needs to be something that's really consistent, even between vintages, something that you can rely on, something where there's the volume in existence for you to be able to draw upon. And I think also from a kind of quality control perspective, you need to have slightly more robust supply chain and filling and all of that stuff to make sure that you can meet the more rigorous demands of a kind of larger company being your end consumer. So we did a piece of work last year trying to find wineries that at once could do all of these really big business things, but that still had our ethos of family run, something that we could feel proud wasn't just from some sort of great big factory, but was a wine that somebody somewhere really cared about. So we've actually just launched 3 new Italian wines, which are intended to be drunk in restaurants and bars. We're calling it Better Than House Wine, so it's a house wine price, but the sorts of wines you could never find as the house wine on a wine menu. And that has just been, that same piece of work. Now, your next logical question is well, how do you go about that? And it really is about networking. And Clem's got this incredible little black book. We have kind of negociants, so middlemen in market. So we have a guy called Andrea in Italy. We have a guy called Chris in France, and they kind of know the producers, they know the wineries, and they put us in contact with the right people. But it really is a kind of people game.
Yeah. I mean, one experience for me personally sticks out where, I was lucky enough to be holidaying in the south of France in a house opposite a vineyard. And, I'm not so familiar with how many vineyards cover the production of a certain type of wine, or how many of those vineyards produce a grape suitable for that kind of wine, I should say. But he had some bad weather and the vineyard was destroyed, and it happened twice in a row, 2 years in a row. And so, my curiosity really is that if you have chosen a specific type of wine, and I'm not sure again how specific the supply has to be, but you had some, bad natural events, climate change comes along and knocks. Is your business vulnerable to a disruption in the original kind of supply of the grape?
Yeah, so the sorts of wineries we're working with on the kind of bigger scale wines, they won't be it's not always true, but generally they won't be growing all of the grapes on site. What they'll be doing is they'll be going out to the market and finding the best quality parcels of grapes that exist and bringing those together and blending them to create the sort of right style that you're looking for. And it's a real sort of art meets science kind of activity that winemakers are just so brilliant at. So for the kind of larger wineries, we're less kind of vulnerable to like one-off, this like Pierre Jean's vineyard has a bad vintage or a bad harvest. But in terms of like the weather, the kind of impact of climate change, and some of the sort of horrible headlines that you saw, for example, the wildfires in Provence, the biggest impact that actually has is on price. So the smaller the yield from a vintage across a region, the higher generally the price becomes of that wine. So if there's a real shortage of, Provence Rosé is a good example, right? Where it's a fairly small region, it's a really hot wine type that people, hot property that people are willing to pay for. So the price per litre just kind of increases. And that makes you, if you have a long-term contract with a restaurant and bar or with a grocer, I suppose that makes you more vulnerable to those fluctuations in price. But again, that's where it all comes down to the relationships that you've built and making sure that, if it's a smaller vintage, you can still guarantee, a decent cut of the wine, that you would still get first dibs on it. So yeah, it's tricky. Like we're ultimately buying from farmers. I think wine sounds very glamorous, but it's no different to any other type of farming, right? You're
Yes.
sensitive to all of these different conditions.
Yeah.
I heard quite a clandestine story at the weekend about wine. Admittedly, the guy who told me had a few glasses of wine, so he's probably not the most reliable source. But he was basically telling me that in Australia, for example, they're selling more bottles of wine than grapes they can grow in the country. And therefore, they are either shipping the wine over from Europe and blending it in with the Australian wine, and then selling it as Australian wine. Does that kind of thing happen?
Well, so blending. So the word blend is like a bit of a dirty word, right? People say blend and they think, oh my God.
When someone offers me a blended bean coffee, I run a mile. So,
so firstly, I would say that blend doesn't have to mean bad, right? Some of the world's best wines, like from Bordeaux or whatever, are blends. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to combine different grapes together. Then there are quite a lot of rules in wine. There's a lot of rules and it's different by region. So actually one of the challenges is kind of navigating the set, like avoiding the wine police on various topics. But generally speaking, in order for you to call a wine a certain varietal or from a certain region, then somewhere around 85% of that wine needs to be of that style. So it's entirely likely that in your man with his story, you might well be right. And, actually when, we kind of as consumers want to have it every which way, right? We want wine to be cheap, but we also want it to be sort of, single varietal and single vineyard and all of these nice phrases without necessarily knowing what that means.
Yeah.
So there is a huge market globally in cheaper quality wines, cheaper quality grapes that get blended in so that people can kind of make the most out of a harvest, out of a vintage. I mean, for Laylo specifically, it's one thing that we do. I mean, we stand by wine quality. It's why we exist, is to be a great wine company. So we are very particular about making sure that if it's, if we say it's a Pinot Grigio single varietal, that it's 100% Pinot Grigio and that it's not been cut in with other things. But it wouldn't be the end of the world.
No, I mean, I think the reason that I was shocked by the drunken assertion is he was saying there's no percentages required. It could literally be 5% Australian, and then
I don't think that's the case. I mean, they are so particular around what you can and can't say. I would be very surprised. It's a good story though.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Out of interest, when is the wine put into the box? At what stage and where is it?
Yeah, so we actually buy, again, another dirty word is bulk. So when we say we buy in bulk, people are like, oh my God, it's like going, to the Costco of wine and picking up things in bulk. It's not like that at all. So bulk means unbottled. So we buy it unbottled from the vineyard and we bring it over to the UK and we fill here. Now, there are two reasons why we do that. Number one is because we want to stand by our sustainability credentials, and part of that is having the least amount of packaging in transit. So by bringing it over in bulk, it really is the least heavy and the most carbon efficient way of doing it. The second is just for quality, right? So we want to make sure that every single box that leaves our filler looks amazing, has been glued perfectly. I mean, the amount of times I've investigated different types of glue and packaging and perforation. Is this too perforated? Is it, is it hard to push through? Is it not? So by doing that in the UK, we have a lot more control over it. But it's the very last part of the journey for the wine. So, by the time that wine leaves the winery, it's a finished product as far as the winemaking is concerned. We're just the 11th hour, if you like, on the process.
And if it stays sealed, how does the shelf life compare to a bottle?
So unopened, the wine in a box will stay fresh for somewhere between 12 and 18 months. Now this is a lot less than a bottle. We know that people love to lay down certain wines to age. We're not trying to create those kinds of wines. We're not creating a Chateau Rothschild that you're going to save for your firstborn son's christening. This is wine that's designed to be drunk straight away. So part of the challenge, I suppose, with Laylo, unlike other wine businesses, is that we're essentially like FMCG. So we create against demand and we have to forecast that out. And we're constantly bringing in new product and trying to get as close as possible to wine and demand matching one another.
It seems to me I'm not sure what your roadmap is, and I'd love to understand a bit more about what you're going to spend the money on. But is your intention to stay within wines, or it seems once you've created this process for boxing your bulk buys effectively, and you've worked on your packaging to make sure it all stays nice and how it should be for the consumer, you'd be perfectly able to go into different types of drink, or will it always be just wine?
Yeah, I mean, first rule of startup is never say never. But I guess the second rule is to be really clear about who you are and what you do. And we're a wine company. We're not a sustainability company. We're not a design company, although those things are really important to us. We exist to create amazing wines. And I think for the moment, certainly, that has to be the core of what we do. I think we kind of undermine our credentials. I mean, we're trying to say to people, there is a stigma associated with box wine, and the biggest challenge we have is to get people to overcome that. And part of that message is, we work with this master of wine. She's incredible. Here's her picture and her name, and she's like an expert, a world expert in this stuff. And we've worked in wine for years, and we have all this experience, and we're boxed wine specialists. So if you're going to buy a boxed wine, make it ours, because we know what we're doing. And I think by diluting the message too much, then that would be kind of undermined.
Yeah.
You were speaking about shipping and things moving across borders. Made me wonder, Laylo at the moment, is it only sold in the UK? And if so, do you have plans for it to be sold internationally?
Well, I would love that. So at the moment, yes. Again, I think that the key to most things is choosing what you do and doing it really well. And at the moment, the UK there's huge headroom, right? Like we're talking about a market that's only 4% penetrated
Yeah.
here. So I think that the best thing that we can do is to be the best version of Laylo in the UK. That said, we get asked about this all the time. I'm not averse to kind of opportunistic things. So, for example, I'm really interested in the Nordics. I mentioned it earlier, so 60% of the market there is boxed, and they actually have quite interesting models. So it's a government monopoly, which means that the government decides, well, they own all the wine shops, and they decide what alcohol gets sold. So they put out these tenders, and you respond to them, and then your product makes it on the shelves. And actually, I think that could be a really good fit. It's almost the opposite end of the spectrum, which is the market that is most interested in boxed wine, and therefore, we have a slightly different marketing challenge to overcome, which is getting people to just spend a bit more and have a better experience.
So in those markets, the Nordics and France, you were saying, anywhere between 40 and 60% of wine is boxed.
Yeah.
Do they has someone in those countries invested in a higher quality version of boxed wine?
Yeah, so there are a couple of small startups. I'd say probably generally even earlier stage than Laylo is.
Okay.
There's a few in the States. So, America's a huge place. And for wine anyway, it can be a very difficult market to enter. In fact, part of the time that I spent at Naked Wines was a period when we were trying to really navigate that. And it's really difficult because state by state, they have different laws. There's this thing called the 3-tier system, which makes it very difficult for you to be direct to consumer. But in the States, there are a couple of premium players that I think look really great. And there's one called Juliet, one called Boxed. But at the moment, I kind of feel like, well, actually in a market globally that's so huge and so underpenetrated, having some other people out there sort of saying the same thing is actually, what do they say? The rising tide something does all ships. I was like, I started it and then I'm like, not sure I've ever finished this one before. But so I think it's a good thing at the moment. And as far as I know, none of them have ambitions to come to our shores at the moment. We don't make it too easy for people to come either.
So you've got you've had, I imagine, your focus for the last 9 months or however long it's been on the fundraise, and now that's conquered, I take it you now have to look internally to Laylo and watch the team grow. We met a few of your team downstairs in this lovely office in Soho. But what are your plans to grow your team, and what kind of positions sit at the top of your sort of priority list as people you need to secure?
Yeah. Firstly, I loved the word conquered. I hadn't really thought of myself as a conqueror, but I'm going to take it.
Let's go.
So, I mean, obviously growing the team is key. For us, we have a brilliant team who have kind of skills across marketing and operations. And we've just hired an exceptional chief commercial officer who's going to make sure that all of our finances and all of our commercial deals have got that sort of rubber stamp, which I'm very pleased about. Not that I can't be trusted, but I'm glad that that's not in my hands. The main area where we are hiring is sales. And again, it's this recurring theme where actually on-trade, which is the most exciting area for us, is a very people-driven business. And we already have some really fab relationships, and the people we work with, I hope that they would agree with this statement, but I think people generally like us and get on with us, but we just need to really accelerate that. And that I'm sure that there's some sort of speedy way to do that or silver bullet somewhere, but actually the tried and tested route to success is to just have more people out there telling your story, building relationships. So any good salespeople, I'm hoping will see our ad and come and work with us.
Presumably with some pretty extensive wine experience in sales.
I don't know. I mean, interesting interesting question, and one that we've debated quite a bit, because I feel like the wine stuff you can learn. Like I went to work at Naked Wines, as marketing director, having never worked in marketing or wine before.
Right. Oh, wow.
So I feel like there's some stuff. I was a management consultant. I worked in the city, and I met the founder, got on really well with him, and got offered this incredible life-changing job. So, I think that there are some things that you can learn, and I actually think that sales, relationship building, is more of a skill. I'm sure there's plenty of sales coaches out there who would disagree with me, but I would rather have an applicant for a role here that had, that was immediately engaging, that was articulate, that was enthusiastic, that had the right attitude about, keeping going, resilient, resourceful, than someone who walked in and said, I'm a WSET level 3 wine student. I think the wine stuff can be learned.
Yeah. And how are you finding, presumably you've started the search for your new team members already. How are you finding the candidate market, so to speak?
Yeah, so we've hired one brilliant salesperson up in the north. So he's based in Liverpool. He smashed it because he brought an account with him through the process. So that was
That's
very
smooth.
cool.
It's a good way in, isn't it?
Yeah, we like that.
We liked it a lot. But I'd say it's quite hard. I think that me personally, I have to rely on other people through recruitment processes, because just in my nature, I want everyone to succeed. So anyone who walks in, I'm really gunning for them. And I do tend to see the very best in people, which I think is great once you're someone's manager, but I don't think is brilliant through recruitment. So
totally agree.
we're making sure that we've got a few other people involved in that process. I think it's quite a hard market, I guess. We're living in a cost of living crisis where people's mortgages have gone up, and people's grocery bills, energy bills have gone up, and so I think asking someone to take a leap and change job at all is quite big. If you're broadly happy, you kind of stay where you are. And then also, asking someone to take a leap to a startup, even a brilliantly well-funded startup now at this stage, is quite big. So, and then you've always got this sort of endless quandary of, we've taken this round of investment and we've got some really big, ambitious plans, and we kind of need people yesterday to deliver them. But at the same time, you don't want to compromise, because in a team of, currently 5, soon to be, 8 or 9, it's everyone has to be brilliant. You can't just take a sort of B player because you need a bum on a seat, or out selling stuff. So I don't know if we're striking those right balances, but we're certainly trying to, and I'm fairly mindful of it. But yeah, I think it's quite tricky.
I saw some news recently that your co-founder, another Laura, has decided to take a step back from Laylo. And I was wondering how that has affected your role within the company.
Yeah, so me and Laura started it together. We were colleagues from Naked Wines. And for lots of reasons, she decided about, I guess through the sort of fundraising period and perhaps beyond that she wanted to pursue other things. And I think at that point, it was huge going into business with someone, and you've got a choice, haven't you? You either make that difficult, or you say, like, I completely respect your decision. Let's make the best version of this that we possibly can. And I think she would agree with this, that we did that. Like she is a non-exec director. She's working on a consulting basis for Laylo, as we have big projects where her skill set is really required. So, and we've remained really good friends. So I think that this is a win. But for me personally, there's also an element of it being a really exciting time, because I'm taking the lead in the business, not in a sort of joint co-founder way, but as CEO. I always feel really uncomfortable saying that when it's it's a small business, but it is a true CEO role, right? Which is managing pretty much every aspect of the business, but also getting stuck in. And I'm excited about that. I'm really looking forward to the next phase of our growth, and so much of that is the plans that Laura and I made together. And I feel really honoured that I'm the person going on and executing them. But yeah, it is a big change. There's a lot. I spin so many plates.
But you sound like you're ready to take on the challenge, so that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, this week in particular, I'm CEO and co-founder of a like startup business with loads of plans, but I'm also like a mum planning my 6-year-old daughter's birthday party on Saturday, which is more work than I ever thought, I ever imagined.
At least the wine's sorted for the parents.
I know. The parents, we've got RSVPs, and generally, like, some parents like drop and go, or they might send two kids together with one of the mums and dads. Everyone said yes. It's like, all right, okay, I see.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Also, one of the things, just another personal interest of mine was that when I was getting to know Laylo and having a look at all of the benefits of selling boxed wine, this isn't about wine per se, but I was suddenly confused as to why I don't see more products sold in boxes. Because the freshness is such a massive part. And, everybody buys milk and everybody puts their milk in their fridge door and it kind of goes off and everyone's a bit unsure.
What do you think about carbonated drinks? Although, would it work?
Wouldn't work.
It wouldn't work. Okay, that makes sense.
But yeah, although you will notice now, like, it is happening more. It's just, it's slow. So you don't have that immediate, but like if I walked into Marks and Spencer's just around the corner, I was getting my lunch, and there was this huge tower bag-in-box. I was like, whoa, what's that? And it's water, and they've got like boxed water, and I'm like, well, that makes total sense rather than those plastic crappy bottles. Way more space efficient, and no one's worried about the quality of the water, are they? So
no, indeed.
Like,
but the freshness,
olive oil,
the shelf life on so many. I mean, in fact, all bottled liquids. I mean, I can rarely think of an opportunity where I've ever doshed a whole bottle of something into whatever it is. If it's orange juice, if it's milk, and then I'm kind of, even if it's not, it's something not so distinct as wine oxidizing, it's just orange juice that's been open for 3 days. You're still, like, lots of us are still a bit like, and has anyone drank from the bottle itself while my back's been turned to the fridge? That's a big one in my household. That's a big one in my household.
More likely to happen with a wine, I reckon.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's I mean, you answered it really well, but the point about people drinking less, you're right. It's not that they're drinking less per se. They're just having it in a different way.
Yeah.
And that is so true. The analogy of, I literally found a bottle of wine in my fridge the other day and I have no idea when I opened it.
Yeah.
It's just been sat in the door. I can't drink it because I don't even remember when I opened it.
Yeah.
And that is a really incredible thing, actually. And the fact that the box market is so small at the moment, only the 4%, and that 1 point alone is just such a big thing for most people, and it just feels like you really are on something that is about to grow. It just has to come with that sort of educational marketing piece to help people get over the line.
Exactly, and I do think there's going to be like a boom moment. Like we've definitely been. I mean, we've got really nice growth rates, and we have really good retention rates. So I think that says a lot. And once people have like switched to boxed wine, they're a bit like, why didn't I do this before?
Yeah.
But it's still not like mainstream. I mean, it's actually a year ago today, we were on Sunday brunch on the telly, and like that was huge because I don't think I'd ever seen a boxed wine on TV before.
Yeah.
Cool.
But
and how did that come about, if you don't mind me asking?
So pure hustle. So I love PR, and I think so. Journalists receive so many emails in their inbox, and so many press releases. Unless it's like financial, I just don't think anyone should be writing a press release. They're universally boring. But I was trying to get on Sunday Brunch or Saturday Kitchen or This Morning or any of these TV shows. And I was kind of trying to figure out who makes the decisions. And so there was this kind of complex web of emailing people, getting out of offices because it's quite transient in that industry. And I kind of noticed that every time I sent in samples, I never ever heard. And I thought, I'm pretty sure that these people don't even get the samples. Like I'm pretty sure if you tasted something, you'd just at least reply, be like,
Yeah.
the wine's really nice and I'll keep it in mind, or something. So I decided that I needed to get it into their hands and actually have a conversation. So in the myriad of emails I'd sent, I then found the decision maker at Sunday Brunch. I found their email address, and I obviously knew their name, so started to look on Instagram and discovered that it was her birthday coming up through some mega deep, I don't want to say stalking, baby reindeer.
We've all been there. It's okay.
You're really interested and you dig a bit deep. So I thought, well, I know if I just send in a sample, this is going to get rejected. Or just left for someone to take home. So I turned up at the production company offices with our wine wrapped up with a great big bow on top, just ahead of her birthday. I arrived at reception and I said, oh, who are you here to see? And I said the name. And they were like, are they expecting to see you? And I said, yeah, I'm a friend. I've brought a birthday present. And this person actually was so intrigued that they just came down to see who this person was with a birthday present. And then we could, not only could I hand over the samples, and at this point it would be really, really rude not to just try some, but also meant we could have a conversation. I could tell them about the company, and we were on Sunday Brunch. Must be a couple of months later.
Wow. What an
That
amazing
is
story.
It's
That
really
is
cool.
a real
Yeah. That's the sort of pursuit of happiness film moment where you just you turn around, you come out, box out of your hand.
I think you have to. I think you have to be kind of fearless. So it's that equivalent of when you see that person in the street that maybe a celebrity or someone who works at the company you want to work for, and honestly, what's the worst that can happen if you go up and just shoot a shot? I feel like I've done so many things in the last few years where I'm I would have been so scared to do this before, but when you've got a company that we need to grow, and the way you grow is by making the most of every single opportunity. So I'm generally pretty fearless. I must admit, the time I saw Harry Styles, I did not shoot the shot. I just was just oh my god, it's Harry Styles. Apart from that, I really regret it. So.
And the wine master, what's the role of the wine? The name of the role?
Master of wine.
Master of wine, right? You mentioned that there's only 400, let's say, in the world. A lot of us have experienced, keeping your best players in your business for a long period of time. Are you having to use some sort of magic spell or karate to keep other wine companies at bay from stealing your master of wines? And how do you manage that relationship? Because they must be in hot demand.
So, they generally work freelance. Some have jobs in, big companies. So I don't know for sure, but, the main buyer, a Waitrose or something, is probably a master of wine. But lots of masters of wine are, they are in their hot properties. So we'll work with other people. Clem, who we work with, we're the only boxed wine company that she works with, and she's been there from pretty much day one with us. So we have a fab relationship. So there's plenty of other projects that she could get her teeth into. But it's an incredible skill. To get the qualification, one of the tests that they do, or the exams that they sit, is this tasting exam. And it's not just I'm pretty impressed if I get a glass of wine and I'm oh, this is a Syrah. I'd be my friends are wow, you know so much about wine. Whereas actually, in the sorts of exams Clem would have sat, it would have been taste a wine, and not only do you need to know the varietal and the region, so not just country but region, but down to the can you suggest a producer that this could be? So imagine just blind tasting a wine and then being able to say, oh, I actually think this could be, Smithor Lafitte in Bordeaux or something. Just knowing, maybe even guessing the vintage. It's really extreme.
Golly. I'll have my taste buds insured.
Yeah.
That is nuts.
COVID was pretty scary.
Well, the Master of Wines is pretending they could taste. Oh, this is good. Great. Okay. Well, I think, Laura, that's we've learned so much, and we're very excited to see what happens to Laylo. Congratulations on getting
Thank
into
you.
Ocado and elsewhere, and it's going to be great fun to see where you go from next. And I know I speak for myself at least when I say we'll be getting some Laylo boxed wine into our household, see how it's reviewed.
Yeah.
I'll see if my wife can guess the vintage. And
Exactly.
maybe she could do that as a side hobby.
Cool.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks ever so
Laura.
much.
Thank you.
Cheers.